Hello and welcome to Hey Ask Me Stuff, the weekly program where you out there get to ask me stuff. My name is Ken Coughlin. I'm a Christian apologist coming at you from Trinity Lutheran Church and School in Joppa, Maryland. Thank you very much for joining us this evening. If this is your first time watching the show, let me tell you what it's all about. This is a weekly program every Tuesday at 6:30 p.m. here on the Trinity Joppa YouTube channel, where audience members out there submit questions. And then each week we pick one of those questions and we address that here live on the air. Usually it's me. Occasionally we do have some other people here joining us as well. You want to know how to get your question on the air? You go here to trinityjoppa.org/askmestuff. When you go to trinityjoppa.org/askmestuff, you will find a form on there that you can fill out, submit your question and send it in. And then we can look through all of those and pick whatever our next one for each week is going to be. So if you haven't done it already, do that. Speaking of things that if you haven't done already, do that. I've been mentioning on the show for the last several weeks that we have set a goal where we're trying to get to 2,000 subscribers on our YouTube channel. Last week, we were at 1,598. This week, as of just a minute ago when I checked, we were at 1,610. So thank you very much. That means we've got 12 subscribers in the past 7 days. So yay. Let's keep it going. I would really much appreciate it if you haven't subscribed already to do so, and tell your friends about it, tell your family about it. A lot of great things on the channel. It's not just this podcast. Obviously, this is the official channel of Trinity Lutheran Church in Joppa, Maryland. So we got the worship services, we got the messages, we've got Bible studies and classes, we got a lot of YouTube shorts. We've got some clips, things that are clipped out from this program for just isolated topics, things like that. So do me a favor, go ahead and subscribe to the YouTube channel, help us reach our goal. We would really, really appreciate it. And of course, like the video, comment down below. Speaking of commenting, as we go through our topic for this evening, if you are watching us live, you are invited to join in the conversation. And the way you do that is you just type your comment into the live chat there on YouTube. And when you do that, it'll appear on the screen. And I will be able to see it on my screen up here and we can interact. So agree with me, disagree with me, have your own thoughts you want to share. Put them there in the live chat. Let's talk about it tonight. Really love to have the conversation. And if you're not watching us live, well, you can be part of the conversation as well. And the way you do that is by putting your comment in the comment section. Let us know what you think. All right. So with all that being said, we are going to get to what our topic for the night is. And our topic for the evening is this: is social justice biblical justice? This is one that was submitted to me by some members of the, I don't know who exactly, but some members of our women's Bible study here at Trinity that meets every week. So we're going to take a stab at it. Jay Jackson says, comment just like this. Yes, very good. See, Pastor Jay, if Pastor Jay can do it, you can do it too. And it'll show up on the screen just like that. Although I will say the comments only show up when I'm on this view, when I'm showing like a slide or something, the comments don't show up. But don't worry, they'll be back once I come back to this camera angle. So, all right, so is social justice biblical justice? I guess the first thing I want to do is give kind of a cautionary note. The answer to the question, is social justice biblical justice, is, depends on who you're talking to. And the reason I say that is because, and this is not limited to this subject area, if you were to go out and talk to someone and that person says that they are all in on social justice, the next thing you should do before you start assuming you know what they mean and getting into some kind of an intellectual discussion or debate with them, ask them one simple question: what do you mean by that? That should be, I think, the first question, because a lot of people, we hear the lingo and we hear the terms and we think we know what they mean. And so we'll say, yeah, I think that we should have justice in our society, so I'm in favor of social justice. And we might be unaware of the baggage or the scholarly meaning, whatever you want to call it, that those terms actually have come to mean. And so I'm going to go into tonight kind of what the consensus view, what the scholarly view, what the world view is of social justice that's permeating our culture today. But that doesn't mean that every single individual person you talk to is going to adhere to every single one of these at these points that I'm going to make. And Pastor Reese says, or like this. Yeah, so see, both Pastor Jay and Pastor Reese can comment, so you can too. All right, so that with that first cautionary note, I'll move into my second cautionary note, and that is I always love quoting, 1 Peter 3:15. Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that you have, but do this with gentleness and respect. It was not too long ago that a certain late night host became very popular for a saying that he had out there. He says, you and I, we may disagree, but I'm pretty sure you're not Hitler. And what he was meant by that is, yeah, we can have differences of opinion and not treat people like they're persona non grata, not treat people like just the mere fact that they have a difference of opinion means they're somehow completely evil and horrible and all of that. I'm not saying who it was because I think some of the things this particular former late night host has done more recently maybe haven't lived up to that standard. But that's kind of the point I want to make here is that when you're talking to people who maybe have a different view of justice than you do, and I don't know which side of the discussion you're going to come down on as I go through this tonight, but let's not just automatically assume that everybody that disagrees with us has insincere motives or is out to destroy society and destroy our culture. I think we're in a much better and healthier place if we start out by assuming that everybody involved in this conversation wants to do the right thing. We want to promote the welfare of humankind. We want people to be better off. And that's going to allow us to have a much more gracious discussion about it, I think. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start out giving you a short cheat sheet here of the short answer of two primary differences, I think, between biblical justice and social justice. And again, by social justice, I'm referring to this social justice movement. And actually, I take that back. Before I do that, let me cover this. Actually, I put my slides out of order, so I'm going to change something here for a minute. I want to make sure we are clear about one thing, and that is this: as Christians, we are commanded to do justice. Period. All right. Micah 1:8 says, "He has shown you, O mortal," meaning God has shown you, "what is good. And what does the Lord require of you? To act justly and to love mercy and to walk humbly with your God." All right. To act justly and to love mercy and to walk humbly with your God. Jeremiah 22, verse 3 says, "This is what the Lord says. Do what is just and right. Rescue from the hand of the oppressor, the one who has been robbed." So understand from the get-go that doing justice is not an option for the Christian. That is something that we are commanded to do by God. The question then arises, though, what does that mean? What does biblical justice look like? And I personally believe that the way God describes justice in the Bible is not the same way that the modern day social justice movement defines that term. We're using the same word, but we're not meaning the same thing by it. And here are my quick little bullet points of two key differences I see between the way the Bible defines justice and the way the modern social justice movement defines the term. Biblical justice is based upon, first of all, impartiality and equality when going into a situation. In other words, if we are, and we'll see some examples of this, I'll spell them out more specifically, but when we are going into a judgment, when we are entering into opportunities for people to have employment or to earn a living, things like that, that are the way we handle all of our situations going into them should be impartially and with equality. We should not be excluding certain groups from opportunities because of X, because of the color of their skin, because of their gender, because of their religion. With some exceptions, obviously, I don't think that a Christian church should be forced to have a Muslim imam become their pastor, and vice versa. All right, but you see what I mean. going into these situations, we should be impartial and we should be promoting equality. Social justice, the modern social justice movement, instead of looking at equality going into these situations, looks at equity coming out of the situations. So it's more promoting equality of outcome as opposed to equality of opportunity. And there are justifications that people raise for this. They say, well, if we don't start out on equal footing, then even if you theoretically give people equality in opportunity, then they're still not going to be able to achieve the same thing because they're starting out at different levels. And so that's the number one difference in focus. The second difference in focus, I believe, between biblical justice and the way the Bible describes justice and the modern social justice movement is biblical justice is justice on an individual basis. The focus in the Bible when it speaks of justice is on individual responsibility for our actions, for our sins, things of that nature. Social justice looks at a higher level. Social justice is really talking about justice on a structural, class, group type basis. And hopefully, as we walk through this, you'll see a little bit more about what I mean by that. All right. So, let's see. Here we go. Let's talk first in more detail about biblical justice, and then I'll talk about social justice. And even with biblical justice, I think when that term is used in the Bible, there's two types of what we would call biblical justice. The first kind is not really what we're talking about here, but I'll mention it. It's retributive justice. All right. And the verse, very famous group of verses I'm sure all of you have heard of. I'm pulling up Exodus 21, 23 through 25, which is, but if there is serious injury, you are to take life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burn for burn, wound for wound, bruise for bruise. I'm not going to go into a big Bible study on these verses, but the two principles I think you primarily get out of this is number one, if you commit an offense, you deserve to be punished for it. All right. And if an individual commits a wrong, does something wrong, they deserve to be punished for it. And number two, that punishment should be proportional to the offense. It doesn't necessarily literally mean that you have to do the exact same thing. A lot of people take these verses that way, but it has to be proportional. So if somebody shoplifts a pen, you shouldn't be locking them up in prison for 80 years. All right. The punishment has to fit the crime, so to speak. That's retributive justice and what the Christian view or the biblical view of equality should factor into. So we should, when we're administering retributive justice, it should be done without consideration of race or of creed or of gender or age or any of these things. You know, the only thing that matters is the offense and the punishment that is proportional to that offense. All right. The second type of biblical justice, and the one that we're more talking about here tonight, is restorative justice. Restorative justice is when we're talking about those, saying that those people who have been hurt or who have been wronged in some way should be restored. And we as a church should be involved in that. And our involvement in that should be impartial. So if we see someone who doesn't have food, we should feed them. Like we see in these verses, Proverbs 25:21, which was also quoted by Paul in Romans 12:20. Same thing. If your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he is thirsty, give him something to drink. All right. That's restorative justice. And that needs to be handled impartially without, I don't care if somebody comes to our food ministry here at Trinity, we don't give them a questionnaire to ask, well, you know, let's evaluate your faith first before we're going to give you food and see if you really deserve it. Let me see what, we're going to give food to this class of people, but not this class of people. No, it doesn't matter. The eligibility, at least for the church food, obviously we have some government food that does come with some strings attached, but that the government gives to us. But other than that, if it's the church food that we provide ourselves, here's the criteria. Are you here? You hungry? We're going to feed you. Ta-da. That's it. All right. And that's because of this idea of restorative justice, of treating everybody equally and restoring them in the biblical, in the Bible. And the other example I have on here, of course, is the parable of the Good Samaritan, where we see Jesus talking about kind of bucking expectations about, Jew versus Samaritan. And while you have this person that's hurt on the side of the road, this Jewish person hurt on the side of the road, the priest and the Levite all walk on by, but it's the Samaritan who, if you understand the culture at the time, Jews and Samaritans did not get along, but the Samaritan's the one who actually was a neighbor to him, who actually helped him. And again, that's getting to this idea of equality and impartiality in restorative justice. It shouldn't matter what nation we're from. If someone's in need, you help them. All right. Now, the point of both of these types of justice, both the retributive and the restorative justice, is you'll notice a running theme that is still based on individual responsibility, or it's on an individual basis. When we look to retributive justice, it's we punish an individual for that individual's crimes. When it comes to restorative justice, we're looking at an individual in need and we're helping that individual. We're focusing our help on that individual. Now, of course, it may be a whole lot of individuals, like at the food ministry here, but it's still, we're making that personal connection and we're talking to that individual person to try to help them out. All right. And a couple other verses here from the Bible that kind of emphasize that when God's talking about justice, he's talking about individual responsibility. Deuteronomy 24:16. Parents are not to be put to death for their children, nor children put to death for their parents. Each will die for their own sin. We are all personally responsible for the offenses we commit. And then 2 Thessalonians 3:10. For even when we were with you, we gave you this rule. The one who is unwilling to work shall not eat. You are responsible for your own welfare if you are able to provide for it. We will help you if hard times and unforeseen circumstances fall. If you're in need for any reason, we're still going to help you. But part of that help that we give has to be with an eye towards this. The biblical ideal is you're supposed to be working for your food. You're supposed to not sit back and just take, but you're actually supposed to earn your own keep, so to speak. All right. So the Bible is speaking of, lost my thing here. All right. So the Bible largely is speaking of things on an individual basis, individual accountability, helping out the individuals that are in need. So contrasting this then with the modern idea of social justice. All right. So social justice is, first of all, based on a theory from Karl Marx. Well, it's been advocated by others, but Karl Marx, I think, was the first one to advocate for it, called conflict theory. I'm not going to go into a big Marxian discussion here, but the basic gist of Karl Marx's theory is that any society, is always in a state of conflict. And the reason it's always in a state of conflict is because there's a limited number of resources. And everybody out there is competing for these limited number of resources. And there's not enough resources to make everybody happy. So we're in constant competition for them. And what Marx says is that the way that order is maintained in a society is basically a situation where you have domination and power. And you think of it as in groups. You have those who have wealth and who have power are going to try to hold on to that and hold on to whatever resources they can grab by any means possible. So you have society is divided up into groups. And keep in mind, power doesn't necessarily just mean political power. There's cultural power, there's social power, there's other types of power that you can have. The point is that whatever this power you have, for some reason or other, enables you to grasp hold of some of the limited resources in that society. And so you have this group that has the power and has the resources, or has more of the resources, and they're going to do everything within their power to hold on to that and hold down and press down on the classes who do not have as much power and therefore do not have as much in the way of resources. Now, the way this has come about in modern social justice theory are the terms you'll hear a lot are oppressors and oppressed. So social justice theory divides our culture up into groups, into categories. And they say certain categories are the oppressors. All right. These are the ones that in Karl Marx would be like the ones that have the power, that have the resources and their fists clenched on the resources. And then the other categories would fall under the group of oppressed. Oppressed categories, these are the ones that are being held down, that are being pushed down. All right. And so the core value then of the social justice movement is to say that we need to redistribute these resources, that the oppressor class has a disproportionate number of the resources based upon their oppression, or the fact that they are oppressing others, and the oppressed classes don't have as much of the resources. And so we need to take resources from the oppressors and redistribute them to the oppressed. How is that going to happen, you may ask? Well, if you don't have God in the picture, and so you can't trust, and because Karl Marx did not have God in his theory at all, and so you can't trust God for justice in the next life, well, then you look to the next most powerful thing you can find, and that's government, right? So it then becomes the role of government to take resources from the oppressor class and redistribute them to the oppressed class so that we can have equality in outcome, or what's called equity is the term you hear a lot. And so the idea is now we're going to get rid of this imbalance between oppressors and oppressed, so that if the oppressors have all the resources up here and the oppressed only have these resources, then we're going to take resources away from them up here and we're going to move them down and we're going to balance it out to balance out resources across the society. So that's the basic gist of what the modern social justice theory is kind of getting at. Here's some of what I believe are disadvantages and why. First of all, I guess I should first say the reason I say this is not the same as biblical justice is you see the difference in focus right there. Is that whereas biblical justice is looking at us as on an individual basis, social justice is looking at us based on membership in certain classes. And so understand, if you are considered to be a member of an oppressor class, whether or not you yourself have done anything blameworthy, culpable, whatever, it doesn't matter. Merely by virtue of your membership in that class, this theory would say you should have resources taken away from you and given to somebody else from another class, even if the member of the other class maybe would not otherwise be getting that on an individual basis. Maybe the member of the other class has done some things that, if under the biblical view of justice, would be deserving of punishment, for example. And so that's what I mean by it's focused more by looking at the outcomes and trying to balance out the allocation of resources at the far end. All right. So it divides us up into groups, and everybody's a member of either an oppressed group or an oppressor group, and we are encouraged to view each other through the lenses of these groups. And the issue, I think, with that from a biblical standpoint is we're not really looked at as individuals anymore. We're not considered to be held individually responsible. And again, I'm speaking of the theory in broad terms. I understand everybody's an individual and there's nuances here. And there certainly can be people that look at society through this lens, but still try to balance it out with some degree of individual responsibility. I'm not denying that. I'm just talking about the theory of social justice. But the theory of social justice says, no, we don't look at ourselves as individuals anymore. And the other thing is we don't look at ourselves as one unified human race that's all in this together anymore. If you look at a justice through this social justice lens, then we are constantly in conflict with each other, because you are told that you are either a member of an oppressor group or an oppressed group, and you should be in conflict with people who are from the other group. And so it's actually encouraging division, and it's encouraging conflict between the different groups, which I think personally is the opposite of love your neighbor, love your enemy. I don't think that's what we as Christians are supposed to be encouraging. We should be encouraging unity and love, love for each other, as opposed to division and competition with each other. Now, does that mean that we as Christians should not be still pursuing that restorative justice? Remember, if we see someone who doesn't have the resources, are we supposed to try to help them get back on their feet and everything? Absolutely, we should be doing that. It's more a matter of how you look at the world and what you think the government's role is in addressing that. I do want to bring up one quote here that I came across to kind of illustrate some of this. And this was from a blog that was written back in 2021. The name of the website is the Better Samaritan. The blog title was Social Justice and Biblical Justice are actually one and the same. And the author was named Rebecca Thompson. And this is what Ms. Thompson had to say. She said, when we come alongside someone experiencing homelessness, pursuing justice means helping them find opportunities to gain employment and housing, and advocating for policies that address larger systemic issues which have contributed to their situation. As far as that statement goes, again, depending on what you mean by that, I could say, okay, I agree. And I think we as Christians should agree definitely with the first part of that, performing this restorative justice function does mean helping people find opportunities to gain employment and housing. That's what I was talking about before. He who doesn't work shouldn't eat, right? We're supposed to be encouraging them and helping them to be able to provide for themselves, and advocating for policies that address larger systemic issues which have contributed to their situation. Well, if you ask me, are there broader issues that are contributing to the plight that people are in today? Sure. I mean, I think anybody that tries to say racism doesn't exist anymore is just being flat out naive. Of course it does. All right. Does classism exist? Sure it does. Do you have different subcultures within our country that are competing with each other and want to put each other down? Sure, we have all of that. So we do have absolutely these societal level issues that we should be, as Christians, and we believe everyone's made in the image of God, we are all equally valuable in that sense, then we should be speaking out against and we should be looking to address. The question is, though, are we addressing that on an individual basis? Are we addressing that on an oppressor versus oppressed class basis? We can say that any individual who advocates a racist ideology should be spoken against, should be corrected, and should be condemned. Absolutely. But do we then instead, does this quote mean that we should divide people into oppressor and oppressed classes and say any member of the oppressor class should be spoken against and should have resources taken away from them, etc.? And that's where I say no. I think that is not what the Bible says we should be doing. So, should we be advocating for policies that address larger systemic issues? I guess yes, depending on what you mean by that. But the key question is, how are we to go about doing that? And we need to go about doing that in a way that still lifts up individual dignity. All right, each person, by nature of being a person created in the image of God, has individual worth, individual value, individual dignity, and we should not be viewing them from the lens strictly of their membership in a larger group. We should be looking at them as individual people. And I think this is the result of when you start from a theory. A lot of people might not even realize that the modern social justice movement has its roots in Karl Marx's conflict theory. But when you start, when you move God out of the picture, I mean, face it, with biblical justice, we know we worship a God who is going to do justice, right? Whether in this life or the next, justice will be done, period. And because of who God is, we can trust that he will do that, all right? If you take God out of the picture, though, you don't have that trust anymore. You don't have that confidence anymore. And so now we still all have this inner striving, this inner desire to see justice done. But if we don't have God to look to as the ultimate judge, the ultimate arbiter of justice, then we have to try to find some other way to fill this longing we feel in our heart for justice. And so we inevitably come up with these other systems that don't include God. But of course, as we see, any system that doesn't include God is doomed to fail. It's, as these Marxist governments and policies have throughout history, because you're not going to succeed without God. God says this is the way things are, and if we try to make our own truth instead of embracing God's truth, it's going to have issues. And so that's my biggest qualm, I guess you would say, with the modern social justice movement, is this idea that I think it does deny individual responsibility, and I think it does deny individual value and individual worth in favor of this group oppression mentality, which ends up dividing us and actually, pitting us against each other, which I don't think is biblical. So, all right, that's what I got to say. If anybody has any other comments, now is your last chance to get them in, because I am turning off the nested question. There we go. The question is now gone. So thank you very much for everybody for watching here this evening. Just a reminder, if you haven't subscribed yet, please do so. I don't know what we're at right now. Before we went on the air, we were at 1610. We want to get to 2,000, so please subscribe. Tell your friends all about us. Share the video, like the video, comment below if you're watching us after the fact. And we will be back again next week. If you do have a question that you want to see get on the air, remember, this is how you do it. Go to this website right here, trinityjoppa.org/askmestuff. Submit your question on there, and you might just see it on a future episode. All right, that's all I've got here this evening. So without further ado, I will say thank you very much for joining us. See you next week. God bless.